Let's begin by looking at the question of civil rights. So this is what we've covered so far in class, and references the 14th Amendment's which clause? Equal protection, and deals with groups and making sure that groups get equal protection or equal treatment under the law, and like the same access to the privileges that citizenship should afford everybody. But we're going to switch our focus now away from civil rights and think instead about civil liberties. So if we get most of our civil rights from the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, where do we get civil liberties? It's the Bill of Rights. And although it's confusing, right, the words and the liberties and the rights of Bill of Rights anyway, although it's a little bit confusing, if you think of the word liberty as being like freedom, our civil liberties are freedoms that like protect us from the government getting involved. We are free from, or we have liberty from, government intervention in things that it shouldn't be involved in. And the Bill of Rights is that list of things that the government can't do. Okay? So civil liberties are all about what the government cannot do to us. And they are primarily found in the Bill of Rights, but there's a problem. Because the Bill of Rights begins with the First Amendment, obviously, and the First Amendment begins like this. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or. How did it start? Who's Congress? The legislature of the national government, right? When the Constitution says the word Congress, aren't we talking about the national Congress that we're thinking of? So the Bill of Rights actually isn't about the states at all. It's about what the national government can't do to us. And all the way back, like in the 17, or maybe it was 1802 or something. Anyway, so the late 1700s, the early 1800s, during the Marshall Court, there was a case that went before the Supreme Court called Barron v. Baltimore, which is spelled just like you think it is, Barron v. Baltimore. And in Barron v. Baltimore, the Supreme Court hears this case from this guy. He owned like a wharf and did business out of this like little tiny, I don't know, port or something, but anyway, a wharf. And the city of Baltimore decides to dredge the channel, right? So they like are going to go dig up all of this silt to make the channel deeper. And when they do, the like leftover dirt that they dredge up, it ends up in his wharf, or some of it does. And it makes his wharf too shallow to be used. And he sues, and he says, the state of Maryland, the city of Baltimore, has violated my Fifth Amendment rights. They have taken away my property without due process. You know, they dredged this channel, and now my property is unusable, and they should have to pay me for it. So he's making an eminent domain claim under the U.S. Fifth Amendment. And Justice Marshall hears the case, and he says, listen, I'm sorry, dude, but the Bill of Rights isn't about the states. The U.S. Supreme Court, can't tell the states what to do. I can't make them follow this Fifth Amendment, because the Fifth Amendment is really supposed to be protecting you from the national government, and you're worried about the states. So you've got to take it up with your state. It's not our problem. So precedent has always shown that the Bill of Rights is not about the states, but the national government. But things changed a little bit after the Civil War, because the 14th Amendment was added, and we've been looking at it from the perspective of civil rights, but let me read it a little bit more carefully to you. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, blah, 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 are citizens of the U.S. and of the states wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or process without due process of the law. So what did the 14th Amendment say? Who's they? The states, right? The 14th Amendment now says the states have to protect people's rights. And although it wasn't meant to do that when it was written, right? When it was written, it was meant to make sure that the states didn't say, well, black citizens get these rights and white citizens get these. The words, the language suggests that the states can't do anything that deprives you of your rights as a citizen. And if you're a citizen of the United States, doesn't that mean that your rights include the Bill of Rights? Yes. Well, that's what they began to think in 1925 with the case of Gitlow versus New York. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about now is something called the doctrine of selective incorporation. And it's really important that you remember those words go together, like always. Cement them together in your brain, selective incorporation. Don't ever just say incorporation. It's selective incorporation. So what does that mean? Well, in the case of Gitlow versus New York, this guy Gitlow, he is like an anarchist or something, and he hands out pamphlets, in this busy sort of public square, telling people to join the Communist Party or an anarchist group or I don't know. Anyway, doing something. And the state of New York, they have a law that says that he can't do that, and so he gets arrested for handing out these pamphlets. And he says, wait a minute, the First Amendment says I have a right to free expression, I have a right to free speech, and so therefore they shouldn't be able to prosecute me under this. And he goes to the Supreme Court, and for the very first time, the Supreme Court says, okay, well, the 14th Amendment says the states can't deprive you of your rights. The First Amendment says you have a right to free expression. Therefore, states have to follow that part of the First Amendment, and we're gonna agree with his claim. We're gonna say the state of New York violated his rights. The selective part, though, is that it didn't incorporate or add to the states all of the Bill of Rights. It was just that one tiny clause. So to break down the phrase selective incorporation, incorporation means what? Like we made some cookies this weekend. They were like abject failures, but most gluten-free baking is. And so they were like whatever. But Dorothy is helping me with the recipe, and part of the recipe says incorporate the wet ingredients and the dry ingredients. And what does that mean? Yeah, you mix them together, right? You put them together. And so when we incorporate the Bill of Rights, what we're doing is we're putting it together with the states, okay? So the incorporation part means we're taking the Bill of Rights and we're putting it together with the states. Another word that might make more sense for you, like to just substitute, is to apply, right? Incorporating something to the states means we're going to apply it to the states. But remember, incorporation doesn't stand by itself. What word goes with it? Selective incorporation. So if I'm being selective, am I grabbing a whole group at once? No, what am I doing? I'm nitpicking, right? I'm taking one at a time. So selective incorporation says that when we apply the Bill of Rights to the states, or when we put the Bill of Rights together with the states, we have to do it clause by clause. Not even amendment by amendment, because Gitlow versus New York does not incorporate the entire First Amendment. It incorporates only the right to free speech, period. So we have to incorporate clause by clause. We have to apply the Bill of Rights to the states clause by clause using the 14th Amendment. Okay, so that's the doctrine of selective incorporation. Now, here is a list of cases you do not need to be panicked by. We're not going to learn all of these. But this just shows you how the Bill of Rights has been incorporated to the states over time. Look how many cases it took to incorporate the 6th Amendment to the states. A whole bunch, right? So they were adding piece by piece of the Bill of Rights to the states through the process of selective incorporation using the which amendment? The 14th Amendment. Good. But now we're going to switch gears because selective incorporation is an important doctrine to know. But practically speaking, now that we know the Bill of Rights can be applied to the states, we want to know how it can be applied. What are the rules? So we're going to look at that list of court cases that you guys picked up. This one. And this list is designed to just help you keep things organized, nice and orderly. There are a lot of cases, but I tried to help you a little bit by showing you which ones had to be memorized by name and which ones you can just learn by the idea. So the ones that are underlined are the ones that we want to know by name. So for all of them, yes, it's a lot. So for all of them, you're going to pay attention to which amendment is at stake, and they're grouped, right? So all of our First Amendment cases are all going to be grouped here at the top and so on. And you're going to write down the decision, what is the court rule. But for many of them, you might want to include some other information, especially if there's a test that is created. So remember when we did civil rights? There was strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, and the rational basis test. These are tests the court created to help them figure out how future cases should be decided. In the same way with civil liberties, the court has created certain tests so that when they hear new cases, they have sort of some standards to apply. And so when a case creates a test, for example, we really want to pay attention to those. And so there's room for you to include that. So, okay. We're going to begin with a look at the Establishment Clause. So we're starting with the First Amendment. And if we're thinking about the Establishment Clause, what freedom are we thinking about? Yeah, religious freedom. And specifically, what does the Establishment Clause protect? Okay, the government can't create a religion. What else can't it do? What else does the word establish mean? Can't force you to participate in a religion. What else? Can't prefer a religion. In fact, the wording of the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So they can't even make a law about religion, right? Respecting means about. So they can't make a law even about a religious area. So that's what this Establishment Clause says. So now let's look at it in practice. The first case is pretty easy. It's Engel versus Vitale. It's a 1962 case. So this was the Warren Court. And it's looking at a law, a New York State law, which said that every day in all public schools in the state, they were going to begin the day with a prayer. And the prayer was written very carefully. It was non-sectarian. Notice that it just says Almighty God, right? It doesn't say Jesus. So there's no like particular religious denomination that is denoted here. Anybody who believes in God would be okay with this prayer. The prayer was also non-mandatory. So if a student did not want to participate, all they needed was a note from their parents and they would be excused. They could sit down, they didn't have to participate, stand up, say the prayer, nothing like that. But the day will begin with this prayer. And of course the answer is, does this violate the Establishment Clause? Oh yes. Oh yes, it absolutely violates the Establishment Clause. The Supreme Court here said, listen, even if this is a non-sectarian prayer, the school, the government, is saying that they prefer religion to no religion, right? Remember I said anybody who believes in God would have no problem with the prayer, but what if you don't believe in God, right? So when the school says, we're starting the day with a prayer, even if you don't have to participate, the school is sending a message that prayer, this is the thing that we prefer. This is the thing you ought to do. This is what we're going to encourage, especially in the school situation where that carries so much weight. Like you as students are impressionable by what the school teaches you to do and habit. And so it was considered to be a violation of the Establishment Clause. Interestingly, much more recently, there have been cases about like state legislatures opening with prayer. So like the Texas legislature, and almost all of them in the country, before every lawmaking session, they bring in like some sort of minister to give a like prayer before the thing, and that has been ruled to be okay. That does not violate the Establishment Clause, mostly because it's not a school, right? So like nobody goes to the legislature assuming that what they do is like what we should do in our own lives, or like the legislature trying to tell you what to do. And that the Supreme Court says that the prayer adds gravity to the situation and helps them to remember their solemn duty, and so it's fine. Yes, ma'am.
If a person were to like go to the government about having like the state pledge and everything, one nation under God, would they?
That has been upheld. So the pledge is not a problem, and saying the pledge in school is not a problem, although it can't force you to say the pledge. So we can have it said over the loudspeaker, but we can't force you to say those words. What pledge? Well, the court sometimes, like this is a more complicated question than like we really have time to get into, but the short version, and we'll get to it a little bit more when we talk about Christmas decorations. The court talks about like cultural displays and cultural understandings. So the pledge saying one nation under God is just part of our national culture. It's a thing that we say. We don't like, most people don't think of it as a prayer or like really dwell on the fact that it says under God. It's just a thing that we say. And so that can be okay. In the same way that it's okay for there to be the 10 Commandments like as part of a mural in a courthouse. So long as it's just part of a general display about like legal history, that's fine. And again, we'll get to it some more when we get into Christmas decorations. So why is it okay when the legislature does it, but it's not okay when the school does it? Again, it has to do with the totality of the context. So are we conferring that this is a thing that is preferred? Is this a thing that has been chosen, or are you forced to be here, right? Legislators all run for election. They choose to go there, whereas you, students, are forced to be here via compulsory education laws. There's a whole host of those issues. But the answer to the pledge is mostly this cultural question, that it's not seen as a prayer, it's just seen as this cultural symbol of the country, and therefore it's okay. Okay, so Epperson versus Arkansas. This case is a little bit less important, but it's important, or it's interesting. It looks at a Arkansas state law that bans the teaching of evolution. It didn't say anything about religion at all. It just said no school shall teach the theory of evolution or Darwin's work. Period. End of discussion. So does this violate the Establishment Clause? It doesn't say you're supposed to teach creationism. It just says you can't teach evolution. Well, maybe you can or can't, but that's not about the Establishment Clause. You can. Books can be banned. Maybe. It's not on our curriculum.
Would it violate the Establishment Clause because it holds one set of
Not necessarily, but you're getting closer to the answer. Just to be able to move on, I'll tell you the answer, which is that the Supreme Court said, hold on, what was the reason for this law? The law itself has nothing to do with religion. It doesn't say about you have to teach creationism or that we're not going to teach this because God says no. Like, it doesn't say anything about religion. But the purpose of the law, the reason legislators passed this law, and it was very clear through their public debate, was because they believed that evolution was against their faith, and they didn't want students to be exposed to this like corrupting influence. So if the purpose of the law is religious, even if the words of the law don't have anything to do with religion, that can still be in violation of the Establishment Clause. So it was not a religiously neutral law. Okay, how about Lemon versus Kurtzman? And this one's really important. So if you want to put like a star on the side or draw that little lemon man who I really like, you can. But this one's a really important case. And it has to do with a Pennsylvania state law, which was designed to try to help end a problem with education. So in Pennsylvania, schools are overcrowded. They don't have enough public schools. They don't have enough public school teachers. And they're just really struggling, educationally speaking. And so they pass a law that says that the state of Pennsylvania will pay for the salaries of private school teachers if that private school teacher teaches a purely secular subject. So like, if the private school teacher teaches religion at any point in the day, their salary cannot be paid by the U.S. government or by the state government. If the private school teacher says a prayer at the beginning of every class, that teacher's salary cannot be paid by the state government. But if all the teacher does all day long is teach science from a state-approved textbook, and they don't teach religion class, they don't take the kids to chapel, they just teach science, then the state government will pay that teacher's salary. And the idea was that would help to ease the overcrowding in schools because it will help make private schools more affordable. And they're supposed to be avoiding the Establishment Clause question by not paying teachers of religion. Like, we will not pay to teach religion. We're just paying teachers of secular subjects. So kind of like expanding the public school reach for free. And the law, this benefit was open to any private school. And there are lots of different kinds of private schools, right? Not all private schools are religious. It just so happened that in Pennsylvania, all of the schools that applied for these benefits happened to be Catholic schools. So again, it wasn't that there were only religious schools that could benefit. It just happened to be that the only schools that applied were Catholic schools. And again, they're only paying the salaries of teachers who do not teach religion at any point in their day. Does this violate the Establishment Clause? Why not? Okay, so the purpose was not secular, or the purpose was secular, right? The purpose is not religious. Any other ideas? Well, it doesn't stop people from teaching religion. It just says that the state isn't going to pay for that. Because obviously, if the state paid religion teachers, that would clearly be a violation of the Establishment Clause.
If you're not getting paid, you're not getting paid for doing work by mentioning one thing.
Well, I mean, the private school can still pay them. Like, the religious teachers are going to be paid with it. Like, prior to this law, the private school paid all of their teachers' salaries, right? And all this law does is allow the private schools to have to pay less on teacher salaries because if they have any secular teachers, those teachers can be paid by the state government. Maybe, but remember the benefits are not just open to Catholic schools. They're open to any private schools. It just happened in this case to be that Catholic schools are the beneficiaries. Well, the answer is the Supreme Court said that yes, this does violate the Constitution, but it's a three-part test to figure out why. And Michael figured out the first part. The first question of the Lemon test is, what is the purpose of the law? So this kind of gets to that Epperson versus Arkansas case, right? So is the purpose of the law secular or non-secular? If the purpose of the law is religious, non-secular, then it's unconstitutional. No matter what the law is, if the purpose is religious, it's unconstitutional. But in this case, the purpose is secular. The purpose is completely innocent, has nothing to do with religion. And so we move on to step 2. Step 2 looks at the effect of the law. Is the effect of the law to help or hurt religion? And if the effect of the law affects religion, then it's unconstitutional. If it doesn't, we move on. This question the court was divided on. In the actual decision, they were not clear. So, like, Katie suggests that maybe the effect of the law would help encourage religion because, like, more people are going to go to these schools because they're cheaper. But the court wasn't sure about that. But in any case, we move on to the third part of the test, which is the entanglement portion. And the question asks, does the law unnecessarily entangle or involve the government with religion? And in this case, the court said yes, it does. Because now look, the court's gonna, or the state is gonna have to look at the curriculum of like every class taught in a private school, including religious schools. They're gonna have to be distinguishing between who's a religious teacher and who's not. They're gonna be checking the curriculum. Like all of this is gonna involve the government way too much in the running of private schools, in the running of religious schools. And that's too much connection between religious schools or religious organizations and the government, and therefore it violates the Constitution. Bless you. Which unnecessarily entangles the government in the running of private schools. So part of the point of private schools, the reason they can teach religion, is because they do not fall under the scrutiny of the state government. And so this was too much interaction between the government and these organizations of religion. So that is the Lemon test. So we will have to leave for tomorrow then. The Allegheny County versus ACLU, this is the one I was talking to you about Christmas decorations. So we will pick that up on Thursday.